Thanks for tuning in to U2 Concast. What you are about to watch is one of the videos in our special series on Irish poet Brendan Kennelly. Kennelly has a long history of connections to U2. His epic poem, The Book of Judas, was released in 1991, the same year as Achtung Baby, which has its own Judas-inspired song. The poet and Bono reviewed each other's works in the Irish newspaper, The Sunday Press. Later, Kennelly reviewed the pop album for the U2 fan magazine Propaganda. Most recently, you may have seen the poet mentioned in the liner notes for Songs of Experience, where Bono said Kennelly challenged him to, quote, write as if you're dead. And Bono contributed a reading of one of the Book of Judas poems to the video launch of the Brendan Kennelly Literary Archive in April of 2021. All of our concasts about Brendan Kennelly, as well as links to more resources and to his books, can be found on our U2 Studies page at u2conference.com. Thank you for joining us today for a conversation about Brendan Kennelly with Dr. Åke Persson, who is coming to us today from, did you say Gothenburg, Sweden?
That's right. That's right.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think we should start out by acknowledging that we are recording this the day after we found out that Brendan Kennelly had died. So this is all very fresh, and my sympathies are with you, as you knew Professor Kennelly so much better than I did, but I certainly feel his loss as well.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to responding to your questions, and I agree, it's a very special situation. It's an odd situation in many ways to sit here and talk about Brendan Kennelly just the day after he died. But at the same time, it feels absolutely right to sit here and talk about him. It's affected many people, myself included. I considered myself his friend, at least when I was in Ireland for many years. Yeah, it's sad. Yeah. But I knew that his health had deteriorated somewhat in the last year or so. But it's interesting to see that his death was front page news, you know, in many papers in Ireland, and President Michael D. Higgins and the Taoiseach, the Prime Minister Micheál Martin, they both sort of described his importance and acknowledged his importance, and as well as many other writers, for example, as well. So yeah, it's Ireland is a poorer country in many ways without Brendan Kennelly, definitely.
How did you first meet him?
That's an interesting one. I got a job teaching Swedish, actually, in Trinity College in Dublin, yeah, believe it or not. And I was a grad student, and I was looking for a topic for a PhD dissertation. And I was told that Brendan Kennelly's readings were special, you know, something else. And as I said, I taught at Trinity at the time. This was in the mid-1980s. And I had seen Kennelly around on campus. And I went to a reading, and I was captivated from the word go. It was completely different from what I was used to. You know, poetry readings for me, they were sort of pompous, a bit difficult. But he was so approachable, so accessible, but at the same time, and very humble, and an extremely good reader. Yeah, as I'm sure you know. So I bought his selected poems, one of them, because there are many. This was the one I bought, this edition. And I was hooked from then on. And he had just published, I have a few books here lying. He had just published Cromwell at the time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
Cromwell. Yes. And Bloodaxe. I think you may have talked to Neil Astley as well. They had just taken over his publishing. And he was recognized, that is Kennelly, as an important poet before Cromwell. And I think you can almost divide his career into two parts. I mean, before and after Cromwell, almost. Yeah. But after Cromwell, his career just took off. Yeah, definitely. And I was fortunate and privileged to follow that growing reputation very closely.
Sure.
Just, I was at the right place at the right time, so to speak. Late 80s, early 90s. That you could say almost that was his peak, the 10 years there, 10, 15 years. So I read all his work. I went to his lectures, I went to his readings, I started collecting everything, almost obsessively. So you can say that I lived and breathed Brendan Kennelly for at least 10 years before finishing my dissertation then in 1999. So it was a 10-year, at least 10 years period there where I was stalking him,
As one should when one is doing a dissertation.
Well, I have to say that, when I informed him that I was going to write my dissertation on his work, it's a sign of his generosity that he brought me to, he actually brought me to a pub, but he didn't drink then. He was a recovering alcoholic, but he had just stopped then, and he didn't drink anything, but he wanted me to drink, of course. So, but then he spent an hour with me just talking, about his work, or more even, talking about his work and so on. So it was a perfect door into his poetry. Very generous, and that continued, for 10 years at least or more. But the thing was, it's funny or strange that there wasn't much research at all on his work. Not much written. I mean, he has been reviewed regularly, but not much scholarly work written or done on him. So I started exploring a kind of, it sounds odd, but it was like an unknown territory in many ways. He was well known, but there was something there that, academics didn't seem to acknowledge his work fully. So it was extremely inspiring and motivating for me as a budding academic at the time.
Sure.
So yeah, so that's roughly how I got to know his work. Yeah.
It strikes me that you coming from outside of Ireland, your perspective would be different enough, perhaps, in order to give you more of an insight into that. So I came across your work in a couple of different phases, I suppose, because you said you finished the dissertation in '99. So the essay you released in 1996 was a portion of that, right? Betraying the Age, Brendan Kennelly's Mission. You use that line from Book of Judas, the best way to serve
Yes.
the age is to betray it. And that's exactly
Yes.
what we're exploring. We're exploring the theme of betrayal in
Right.
this year's U2 conference. So
Yes.
can
I
you
think
talk a bit about what you hear in that line?
I can talk a lot about that if you
A
want
whole
to.
dissertation worth, I understand.
Yes, exactly. I can read from the dissertation. But no, it's first of all, I have to say that this is one of the most powerful lines I've ever read. And it's actually been my guide in many ways, mainly in professional life, but perhaps also in private life, I don't know. But certainly in my professional life, it's extremely powerful. It's amazing that one line can actually change your perspective on things.
Sure.
It's mind-boggling. But anyway, it's central, as I see it, to Brendan Kennelly's outlook on art and culture. And with culture, I include politics even. And he has repeatedly said that one of the most stifling things is labeling. Yeah, that is, we're so eager to label everything and everybody into categories. And labeling means that you're reduced as a human being, as I interpret it anyway. And if you don't conform to the label put on you, then you are sort of betraying that label. And I think that's that's central in his work. And I'd like to just read from an extremely popular poem of his, Begin, that I'm sure you've heard of, because I think that this idea is expressed. It's a similar idea, but it's expressed slightly differently. And the last lines read the last 4 lines in the poem begin. They state, though we live in a world that dreams of ending, that always seems about to give in, something that will not acknowledge conclusion insists that we forever begin. And I think it's easy to fall into these comfortable, static and stagnant life situations, where your life is on repeat, as it were, like Groundhog Day, or
Sure.
But living life to the full, I think, means that you insist on renewing yourself.
Yes.
All the time, looking at the world afresh. And I think that was my main point, I think, in the article from 1996, where you have to look at the world through children's eyes. And your one of the most popular poems of his is poem from a 3-year-old.
Yes.
This child who asks all these wonderful questions to the parent, so I think we have that sort of betrayal, if you want, of the stagnant, of the static. So I think that's what he's after there, renewing yourself. But I think I'm politically interested, and I think there is also a political interpretation of this line, and then it becomes very subversive, even more subversive, perhaps. And when it was published, Ireland was still much influenced by the Catholic Church, that many have seen as a rigid sort of organization.
Sure.
In many ways. So this line in that context becomes subversive.
Sure.
Yeah. So what he's saying, I think, is that don't trust or accept religious dogma or any other dogma for that matter. That is, these norms that dictate behavior, which in turn tries to freeze society and freeze your existence. So I think the line is very much about that. Now, sadly, I think this line has become contaminated, unfortunately, and uncomfortable in the light of anti-democratic movements. Terrorism, QAnon, conspiracy thinking, fake news phenomenon, etc. But I'm positive, 150% certain that this line was not intended to go against democratic ideals as we know them.
Is it at all complicated? Is it at all complicated by the fact that the line is credited to Judas?
Well, that is, of course it is, but the best way to serve the age is to betray, Judas says, yeah. On the other hand, Judas, I don't know enough about religious history, but perhaps he's been misunderstood as well. And I think that's partly what the book of Judas is about, I would say. But let me go back to that I think that the line was written in defense of democratic ideals, as I read it anyway. And so for me, it's a positive line. It's encouraging resistance within the democratic sort of framework, and it advocates change. But there are other types of betrayals, and I think this is central to your conference as well, and I'm sure you will explore them more. Most of us, are guilty of betrayal all the time. We betray our ideals in various ways. We betray our bodies, our earth, our children, our spouses, our partners, and so on. And Kennelly, he taps into all of these, or many of these anyway, these smaller betrayals, everyday betrayals, as it were. And he reminds us that we should be aware of them and of these many betrayals, and we should hopefully do something about them.
It's such something you said in reference to change also made me think of you too, because the conference is celebrating the anniversary of Achtung Baby, which is a major change from the sort of look and feel and sound of U2 from the 80s into the 90s. Right. It was this complete reinvention. Right. And that idea of betrayal, I think, was heavy on their minds and seemed to be tapped into in their reading of the Book of Judas in light of that. But let's delve more into the democratic, because I'm assuming this is the dissertation then, that is Betraying the Age, social and artistic protests in Brendan Kennelly's work. That's the work that you published in '99. You said about this that he, in all his activities, Kennelly mounts a social and artistic protest in order to question and challenge established values in Irish society. So what do you think is the goal of this protest, or what has he achieved through it?
Oh, it's a multifaceted protest, obviously, as I see it. But let me say again, maybe I didn't say it, but I mean, his poetry and other activities, well, not maybe his other activities, but certainly his poetry and drama, and to some extent his criticism, I mean, they are timeless and can be applied to different contexts. So let me first say that. But again, I think that much of his poetry certainly was written, as I said, as a response to Irish life and culture, the Irish life and culture that he lived,
yes,
and that he encountered.
Yes.
So in many ways, his poetry, if I talk about that, deals with what I think he sees or saw as an unhealthy Ireland. The dark sides of Irish culture.
Yes.
And that includes an authoritarian and perhaps rigid Catholic Church. But it also includes other let's say, oppressive institutions or ideas which governed Irish life for, as you know, for several generations, and through, for example, education or issues related to health, so on. So his poetry and other activities, I'd say, are very much about liberation. To be free to live life as one wants to live it. And to be true to oneself without the interference of, authorities or dogma. So that's sort of basically what his protest is about, I think. But it's also a liberation from official history. For example, in Cromwell that I mentioned earlier. So the protest is aimed at those who have hijacked history, as I see it anyway, and who put the Irish in a kind of straitjacket. Where only one version has been allowed, and and we know what that has led to. And I think obviously it's changing now, but at the time when he wrote, he was still, he was still assaulted in the street. As you heard of that, maybe.
No, I have not.
He was out walking in the street, and someone came up to him and said, "Oh, you bastard! You're writing good things about Cromwell," and he, knocked him back in the street. So that's, that's a kind of emotion that this work,
Can I just say that anyone who feels someone is punchable because of what you say about Cromwell in the 20th century it's just amazing how long that particular simmering rage has gone on for. That's incredible.
Yeah. So that's how deep that hate went at the time, at least, and that was in the 1980s. So that's one kind of protest. And another kind of protest is aimed, I think, at the literary establishment. Those who are on the inside, the arbiters of taste. And this is especially, now let's see, where do I have that? especially strong in Poetry My Arse.
Yes.
Do you know that?
I bought that book on the title alone.
Poetry My Arse. You know, a long, now let's see, that's a 350-page sequence. So that's, I mean, it's funny in many ways. From 1995. And here he seems to ask, what is poetry? Who is poetry for?
Mm-hmm.
And he seems to ask the question, or you know, argue or put forward the idea to make poetry relevant.
Yes.
For more people.
Yes.
Another poetic expression is necessary.
Yes. And
we need so-called non-poetic topics. I mean, who decides what a poetic topic is? So I think he's after a kind of democratization for poetry or in poetry in some ways. And when you read Poetry My Arse, you know, it's so funny to say.
It's just great to say it, yes.
Yeah. You find yourself asking, is this poetry at all?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, is this, what am I reading now? Is this poetry or what is it? You know, it's sexual banter, it's chance meetings in the street, it's, you know, just gossip, it's a bit of everything. And those who know their Latin, they know, of course, that he's toying with the Latin for art. That is art. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and he seeks, as I argued somewhere, that he seeks a new ars poetica, that is an ars poetica, of course, with E in brackets. So a new and more authentic expression, a more direct expression, saving it, I would say, from more remote institutions.
Yes.
So I think you know, that protest then is at many levels. It's a social protest, but it's also an artistic protest, and it's all about liberation in the end, I think.
Yes. Okay, that's and again, I feel like that connects in with U2's work very well.
Good.
Yeah. Especially I think that that dividing line between art and popularity, perhaps, because he's also such a popular poet, and yet this idea of and yet you two are also likely to be, you know, assaulted in the street by some for various crimes that they are purported to do in their art. Well, let's leave the poem world aside for a moment, because I know that you are also very much an advocate for lifting up Kennelly's prose, that needs to stay front of center as well. What are readers missing if they don't know about Kennelly's prose?
Well, first of all, he's a wonderful prose writer. Not so much his novels, to be honest. He published 2 novels in his early career, in the early 1960s. They are not classics, to put it mildly. I mean, they are readable, of course, but they are not masterpieces. But I would say that his criticism is, you know, he was an extremely sensitive critic. So one should read his prose, first of all, because it's beautiful, but also because of the many insights into Irish canonical poets mainly, but other writers too, like Joyce, for example. So, but it's also the case, I think, that one understands a writer's creativity and aesthetics when he or she writes criticism of other writers. Because then you voice your own concerns, you voice your own position, and so on. And so if you want to understand more fully, let's say, D.H. Lawrence or George Bernard Shaw or Seamus Heaney or Toni Morrison, just to mention a few, I mean, reading their critical work is extremely illuminating.
Yes.
It's a door, if you want, into their, their mind and how it works in different ways from the poetry.
Right.
It's sort of, I've written, and it's not a revolutionary idea that, but the creative and the critical go together, and should go together if the writer's aesthetics is sort of coherent and consistent and thought through. So when you read, and this is perhaps the most beautiful aspect of it, when you read his prose, he comes back to three things: honesty, hope, and joy. Honesty, hope, and joy. He moves from darkness, through darkness, into light, into hope and joy. And I mean, he does that in his poetry as well, but you also see in other ways in his prose, when he sort of studies other writers and takes you on a journey through their writing. It's really quite beautiful. Some pieces are better than others in that sense, but on the whole, it's a fascinating journey.
And he really does go deep into the darkness, which makes the payoff of the joy at the end even more glorious. Like I'm most familiar with Book of Judas, but and he really goes as far down, I think, as possible into the whole. Oh, I can't.
I see what you mean.
Yeah. Tell me, so let's go a little lighter here and talk about the birthday party. I hear you got to be part of the 60th birthday party.
Yes. I edited this book, This Fellow with a Fabulous Smile. And it's there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 photos in a collage by actually Sinead O'Connor's sister, Emer O'Connor.
Ireland is such a small country.
But it's amazing. Yeah,
it's so good.
Emer O'Connor. She's now an art historian in is it UCD or DC? She's
we'll look her up.
Anyway, so my point with this, I mean, Bloodaxe saw it as a tribute, and it is a tribute. But for me, it was more.
Yes.
It was more a sociological almost publication and a sociological approach to the various levels of influence that a writer can have, or that a culture that a person can have.
Sure.
So I wanted the book to reflect that multifaceted, perspective on Brendan Kennelly. And we are many people, as Whitman said, we contain multitudes. And the label poet wasn't enough to capture his contribution, I thought, to Irish culture. Teacher, writer, critic, dramatist, public lecturer, public reader, media personality, but also an enabler, an encourager. He conducted workshops in prisons, and he workshops in schools for both young and old pupils, students. He was a great walker.
Yes.
He was a great listener.
Yes.
So, he took pride in his walking, and he could walk all around Dublin. And he was talking to people, he was listening to women, he was listening to homeless people. And I once saw him give, his coat to a homeless man. And he constantly gave money, of course. And so he was a very, very generous human being. And so he's had an impact on many people's lives in Ireland, as a true teacher has. So at the bottom of all this, you have the teacher.
Yes.
And I think, I hope that at least some of that generosity is captured in this tribute. But I wanted it to be more than a tribute, more a sociological book. But it was never marketed as such. But,
right.
But now, I think that if this book was published now, of course, after yesterday,
yes,
then, I think people will love it. But I don't think it's available anymore, unfortunately. But what I've been trying to say, I think, throughout this interview is that Brendan Kennelly was his poetry, and his poetry was him. I mean, or at least a poetic outlook on life, and that includes all these things, the high and the low, the dark and the light, the ugly and the beautiful. And he often quoted this line by William Blake that he found extremely interesting, I think. Only true progress is through contraries. So in order to understand light, you have to understand the darkness,
right,
and so on. But that's easier said than done, I would say. To take that to its full artistic, what you say, end, or what you say, to its full potential or whatever. That takes courage.
Yes.
That takes courage. And I think he was very courageous in many ways.
Did he enjoy his birthday party?
He did, yes. I think he was genuinely proud. You should have seen him. I mean, it was a full lecture theatre in Trinity College with all, not all, but very many celebrities, media personalities, writers, academics, etc. People were queuing to get tickets.
Who are you sitting next to?
Well, who was I sitting next to? I was sitting next to Bono the whole evening. He wouldn't remember it, I'm sure. But I got his autograph. And the funny thing was, there were a few people, they were reading his, one poem. They had selected one poem each to read. And Bono, I can't remember which one he chose.
I think I have a recording of it. Well, I think it's maybe on our page already. I don't remember.
Oh, right. Well, he chose a poem. He was slightly nervous. I was very surprised to see that he was like a schoolboy. Don't say that to him. But he doesn't remember me. He doesn't know in any way. But it was great. And he gave Brendan Kennelly a birthday present, which I still haven't understood. Why this gesture? He gave him a spear. He gave him a spear from probably an African country, but I'm not sure. I never got around to ask him. So you may have, if you ask him, please get back to me.
I promise I will. You will be the first to know if I ever find out why Bono gave Brendan Kennelly a spear for his 60th birthday.
Yeah, amazing. Everybody was just, what?
Dr. Persson, so thank you so much for your time. I can't thank you enough for taking the time to share these stories and these reflections with me and celebrate Brendan Kennelly's life with us with the U2 conference. I should mention that people should like and subscribe to the U2 conference YouTube page, YouTube channel. We'll have the links, u2conference.com. There is a whole Brendan Kennelly tribute section that has links to various articles and resources, links to other YouTube videos that we are having, these interviews that we're having celebrating Brendan Kennelly. Thank you all for watching, and be good to yourselves. Thank you.
It's been a privilege.